Vem är du?
Jag är döden.
Hello and welcome to Front Row Cinema Club. This is episode 3 of my History of Horror series, and today we're looking at the 1940s and 1950s. If you want to watch the first 2 episodes covering the period between the late 1800s and 1939, I'll put links in the description. Let's begin. 1941. Europe has been at war for 2 years, and America is about to join the fight against the Axis powers. Amidst this turmoil, Universal gave us perhaps its last truly great classic horror, The Wolfman. The Wolfman stars son of Lon Chaney Jr. as Larry Talbot. After returning to his ancestral home in Wales, Talbot is bitten by a werewolf played by none other than Bela Lugosi. Under the full moon, he is cursed to transform into a half-man, half-beast abomination until he is beaten to death with a silver cane at the end of the movie. It was Jack Pierce, Universal's famously disagreeable yet visionary makeup artist, mastermind behind the iconic Frankenstein's monster, who created the Wolfman's look. Lon Chaney was forced to sit for hours at a time as yak hair was glued to his face. Pierce and Chaney hated working together. Chaney claimed that Pierce would deliberately injure him during the hair application process. Tensions also ran high on set between Chaney and his leading lady, Evelyn Ankers. Chaney had a penchant for pranks, and Evelyn evidently didn't find them very amusing. And then came the sequels. 17 of them. Now, 20 years removed from the original Dracula and Frankenstein films, Universal's Monster Squad was looking tired, stale, and hokey. The studio began churning out sequels, reboots, and throwing their monsters together in an effort to revitalise their franchise, leading to such movies as Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman, 1943, never mind that the Wolfman died at the end of the previous film, and House of Dracula, 1945, where cinema goers could see the Hunchback, the Mad Scientist, the Monster, the Dracula, every bad guy you could possibly think of, all for the price of one cinema admission. Lon Chaney Jr. would be Universal's top pick for all these films, and over the course of the 1940s he'd play all of Universal's big hitters. Dracula, well, son of Dracula, but it's practically the same thing. Frankenstein's monster, and the mummy.
One day, we may return there. As I have told you, my dear, ours will be a different life, without material needs. A life that will last through eternity.
Have you ever seen anyone less suitably cast as a vampire in your life? The film, generally considered to be the final nail in the coffin for the classic monsters, is the actually really good comedy Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein, 1949. Here, Bela Lugosi plays Dracula for only the second time on screen, and it would be his last. As Universal churned out horror content on a conveyor belt, other studios were producing classy, fairly grown-up affairs, including Paramount's The Uninvited, MGM's The Picture of Dorian Gray, and ABPC's The Queen of Spades.
What good is the secret to you? For whom are you keeping it?
Held in particularly high regard today is Ealing Studios' Dead of Night, 1945, an anthology horror best known for its final segment, in which a man is tormented by a sinister ventriloquist dummy. Val Lewton, working for RKO, directed Cat People, 1942, bringing a new type of horror to the public's attention. Gone are the European villages and crumbling castles. Cat People is set in present-day New York, and its monster might not be a monster at all, but rather a psychologically damaged woman. Irena Dubrovna, played by Simone Simon, believes she is cursed to turn into a panther whenever she becomes aroused or jealous. Cat People is particularly remembered for this scene. In which a jump scare technique is employed, which would come to be known as a Luton bus. Cat People is a film that divides people. It's subtle. There's nothing like Chaney's Wolfman leaping at you from the shadows. but it is undeniably an important step towards a new, more modern style of horror filmmaking. Personally, I can't help but feel that the 40s are a poor shadow of the 30s when it comes to horror. Not to say that there aren't enjoyable films from this period, there certainly are, but generally, horror started to become stale and old-fashioned. Recovering from the effects of war and in the aftermath of the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, audiences had new fears and anxieties to face. Godzilla, 1954, produced by Toho Studios, Japan. The space age was just over the horizon. Teenagers became a hot new demographic and had disposable cash to spend on movies targeted directly at them. The 1950s saw a boom in television ownership and a huge fall in cinema attendance. As Hollywood suffered, horror came to the small screen, and I won't go into that too much here. If you want more information on horror television, please check out my other video on the topic, I'll leave a link. The studios had to bring people back to the movie theatres, and one way to do this was with a gimmick. Character actor Vincent Price transformed during the 1950s into a titan of the horror genre, beginning with 1953's 3D colour spectacular House of Wax. My favourite of his films from this period is 1959's House on Haunted Hill, but I think he really comes into his own in the 1960s, so let's talk more about him in the next episode. Boris Karloff, the original Frankenstein's monster, continued to work consistently in horror during the 1940s and 50s.
I admire you, Joseph. It took courage to come here, and I'm looking for such a man. But drink, Joseph, drink.
His counterpart, Dracula's Bela Lugosi, found less success, appearing in movies such as Mother Riley Meets the Vampire, 1952, and Bela Lugosi Meets a Brooklyn Gorilla in the same year. In 1955, Lugosi checked himself into rehab, impossibly thin and frail and struggling with drug addiction. His work with director Ed Wood, excellently outlined in Tim Burton's 1994 film Ed Wood, starring Johnny Depp and Martin Landau, was the final nail in Lugosi's career coffin. Lugosi died aged 73 on the 16th of August 1956. He was buried in his Dracula cape. There are two more stars without whom no discussion on 1950s horror could be complete: Peter Cushing and Christopher Lee. The two were paired together in Hammer's reimagining of the Universal monsters in The Curse of Frankenstein, 1957, and The Horror of Dracula, 1958, movies that would go on to spawn a total of 14 sequels between them. Hammer took Universal's dusty old stories and breathed fresh life into them, adding sex appeal, blood, and violence. Hammer horrors are physical, people fight and jump and fall in them. They're a world away from the stuffy drawing room scenes of yesteryear. Dracula is no longer a creeping menace, but a highly active and debonair individual, with a bevy of large-breasted women always conveniently situated around him. Cushing's Van Helsing, similarly, is entirely different from the old man we saw in 1931. He's dynamic. Here we see him cauterizing a vampire bite and pouring holy water over the wound. His Dr. Frankenstein is a cruel and despicable man. Where in James Wales's original Frankenstein, Colin Clive was a tortured victim, a scientist driven mad, Cushing is cold, self-interested, and evil.
It was purchased by my father and illustrates one of the early operations. If you step back a little, you'll see better. Look out, Professor, look out!
Hammer horror films are jam-packed with familiar British faces, and they just feel like home to me. They are complete comfort horror. So, very briefly, that was the 1940s and 1950s in horror. As you may be able to tell, not my favourite decades, but next time things get really exciting. In bloody Technicolor and crisp black and white, a new modern age of horror. Hell. Zombies. Ghosts. And that shower scene. Thank you so much for watching today. Please remember to like, subscribe and share this channel with your friends. For a small channel like mine, your support makes all the difference. And also thanks for putting up with my terrible hay fever voice today. I know I sound really stuffy. What's your favourite 40s or 50s horror? Let me know in the comments and see you again soon. Bye bye.